Welcome to the fish tank.
Hey everybody, Fishman here. I had originally intended this video to be my first maintenance on all the DIY filters I've built recently. But as you can tell, they're not quite at that point yet. Well, actually that's not true. One of them is at a point where it needs to be cleaned. But when we get to that, you'll see there are some extenuating circumstances that I'm kind of working around a little bit, and I want to let it run a little longer. So instead, what I thought I'd do is I'd give you an update on how well they've been working. This particular one is the first one I made. It's the circular box filter. And it is actually not normally in this tank. I moved it across from the tank next door. There was too many other things in the way, so I couldn't really film it quite well. And that's why the mulm is all stirred up in here. As you can tell, it's filtered well. It has mulm in the bottom, and the poly wool is no longer anywhere near white. And more importantly, it maintains a nice clear and balanced chemistry in the tank. Now obviously it has two other filters in there, so it's not really being strained, and of course it's also just filtering a tank for endlers. So and I suspect at some point in time I'm going to have to put this in a more stressful environment to see if it performs as well under that. But so far, I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, I like it when I actually have to do a clean on this. We'll see how it handles that sort of thing. One thing I don't like about it is because there's holes in the bottom for where I had mounted it on the arbor, when you pull it out of the tank, it can let some of the mulm back into the tank. That's easy to rectify, of course, by either plugging up the holes or just putting it into another container or holding your hand underneath it, all sorts of stuff, so I'm not too concerned about it. But anyway, as a first sort of run on this last few months, I'm quite happy with it. It's doing well enough for sure. Now this is the second filter I built. This is actually the box-shaped box filter, and I originally intended those holes at the bottom to be holes that are going to allow the current of the box filter to draw mulm from the bottom of the tank. That part I don't think really works that well. Like I said, it doesn't really have any more mulm on the bottom of it than the other one did. But that said, it also filters well. You can see again the poly wool is no longer white. Actually, I think this one's darker, but then again, it is the only filter in this tank. And I have nothing I can say bad about it. The chemistry is good. The fish are happy. As a matter of fact, one of the platies females had dropped some babies, and there's going to be a short clip of one if you have to really watch what you're doing here coming up shortly, and you can see it. Like I said, oh, there it goes. But like I said, it's a good filter, and again, because you don't need a lathe to make it, it's a bit better in that aspect of it. But again, we'll see how it does when it needs maintenance. This is the Powerlift hob filter, and it actually does need to be cleaned. It actually needed to be cleaned a lot more a week and a half ago. But if you remember last week's video, I showed you some baby plecos. There's one right there. The best thing I've found about this filter so far that I like, there's a bunch of mulm there in the corner, is because it's air driven. The baby plecos, at some time, like there's been 5 or 6 at one time in here, they go in, they clean the algae off of it, they don't get damaged, there's no impeller, so they just go in for a tube ride, and they go in, they clean around for a while, and eventually they swim back into the tank. And this whole filter at one point was quite green with algae, and was the original reason why I was prompted to do a video on how to clean them, because like I said, this one's getting quite dirty. It's time. But then again, the plecos got in there and did my job for me. If you look at the lip here as it pours back in the tank, that's what the whole filter looked like. But again, the plecos cleaned it all off. But unfortunately for them, they can't quite get to the edge. As soon as they get close enough to the edge, the water sweeps them over back into the tank, and that's the end of that. But as you can see, the flow is really great. The 2 Delrin fittings where the Powerlift part has been cleaned off by these guys, and they're all doing quite well. And the fork you see there, I started using this instead of clips for zucchini. I sorry, I can't remember who was the original video runner who I saw that idea from, and I thought I'd give it a go. I really don't like doing that. I mean, there are obviously a number of people who use that method now, but I like to give credit where credit's due, but my apologies, I simply just don't remember. Now, this is the under gravel filter, and I don't think there's any time in the next year that it's going to need maintenance. It's efficient. Like I said, this tank's nice and clean. It does have an, like I said, the pothos filter on top here as well, the planter filter, and it also has that circular box filter going on it. So I don't think this is ever going to really get to the point where it's going to need cleaning anytime soon. You also see on the top there, I put a little splash guard just to keep the water in the tank. And these endlers that I'm growing out here, I'm going to try and get a really good colony going on them. So they're probably pretty much going to be the only thing that's going to go in here. Unless, of course, I get some really good corridor catfish, and then I'm going to put them in here as well. But as you can see, the plants are doing crazy. They're growing too well, which is sometimes the problem with plants. I do need them for some other projects, but that's not yet. It's still something that's coming up. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to cut them back before I can actually ever use them. Especially the spider plant. I mean, once I put it in the pot, you can see it here now. Once it was in the pot, so it's, a good chunk of its roots were out of the water, it just took off. It was just amazing how it's grown, and it's well above where the next row of the bottom, the next row of tanks, where their bottoms are going to be. And well, that's unfortunate because right about there, and so that's going to have to move, of course, and I may just end up moving up to the top row and making another planter for that. And then, of course, we're running into other issues. I don't like cramping these things, so maybe this whole thing will get moved up to the next row. Now, if you remember way back, this was the original planter filter I had made to test everything out, and it's been doing really well. It does have some issues, though, of course. It was the first one. This little pipe that feeds the water in here, which is kind of nice, but because it's so thin, it does plug up fairly often, so I have to keep an eye on it. And because it's underneath all those leaves, I kind of have to dig it out to have a look at it. That's a nuisance. The other thing is, because it's in such a cramped space, the one I was just going to complain about for the future of the other planter, the leaves are a little close to the light, and that is an issue because, well, they get a little bit burnt, and also they get banged around a lot. And that, like I said, it's just one of those things that kind of bugs me a little bit. It does do really well, as you can see. The roots are just bunched up in there, and is what you want. And then this thing originally hung all the way to the floor, and then I had to cut it off because the problem with it being out here like this is it ended up picking up bits of fish food, so it was ended like little flakes of fish food stuck to all the leaves. And because I walked back and forth in front of this tank, it got banged around. It did fine, but aesthetically, it just wasn't looking as good as it could. And especially like some of the leaves that hung over the tank where I take the lid off and put it back on, like that one right there, they got banged up an awful lot. But anyway, like I said, the first run it was good, and it does do its job. So that's pretty much the end of this. There's one little couple more details, but before I forget, please like and or subscribe if you like this style of video. It'd be much appreciated. And if you remember, at the end of those filter builds, I built this no tool, well, very little in the way of tools, box filter. And I've gotten a couple people interested in having them, so I figured, well, I'm going to try just setting it up and whatnot. It is workable as was, but I found if I added this little round plate at the bottom, which held the standpipe in the proper order and the proper place, it's much easier to load. So I had to do that. It will make it much simpler for people to work with and like make it more user friendly. So, and also I widened that hole a little bit so it would fit over it much simpler. And unfortunately, it is no longer super simple, but it'll be much more user friendly. And then finally, at the end here, the other thing I did was I finished making all the adjustments on the deflector for the river tank. And then I went and put on the tank, and the client had a look at it. And he likes the look of it, but he thinks it's a little loud. So I'm going to leave the last little bit of this video without any of me talking, and you can just listen to it. And let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.